She was just another student in the music school, one of many who walked through the hallways with dreams tucked quietly in their hearts. She didn't speak much and usually kept to herself. People hardly noticed her. She wore simple clothes, didn't try to stand out, and often carried a small notebook filled with scribbles that no one else understood. Teachers sometimes assumed she was like any other shy student, someone who would never truly shine. The school had a reputation for producing some of the finest pianists in the city. The hallways echoed with the sounds of ambitious fingers pressing keys, scales being practiced, and soft melodies floating out of classrooms. Students would often boast about their accomplishments or talk about upcoming performances, but she remained in the background. She would quietly observe others while carrying her own secret. She loved music more than anything, and it spoke to her in ways words never could. That morning, the classroom felt especially tense. The teachers were preparing for their evaluation day, a day when students were tested on their skill, technique, and understanding of music. Some teachers whispered to each other about who they thought would succeed and who would struggle. She sat in the corner, quietly observing. She knew this day would come, and part of her felt nervous, but another part felt calm. Music had always been a friend to her, a place where she could escape the noise of expectations and judgment. Her classmates talked about what pieces they would play, some bragging about their previous successes. She didn't respond. She had no need to impress anyone with words. Her practice was private, hidden behind closed doors, and her fingers had learned secrets that only she knew. No one had seen the hours she spent alone with the piano. No one had heard the silent dedication that went into her every movement. And so, the teacher's plan to test her on purpose was built on a false assumption that she was ordinary. When the teachers called her name, she walked slowly to the piano. Every step felt deliberate, like the calm before a storm. Her classmates glanced at her, some with curiosity, some with barely concealed amusement. They had not heard her play, and so they assumed it would be simple, perhaps even awkward. She reached the piano and sat on the bench, her posture relaxed but her mind completely focused. She took a deep breath, not for courage, but to settle herself into the music she already knew was waiting within her. The room was quiet except for the faint rustle of papers and the soft murmurs of students trying not to stare. The teachers watched closely, certain that this would be an ordinary performance, a test that would confirm their assumptions. They asked her to play a simple exercise, something to warm up and reveal her basic skills. She nodded slightly as if she had heard them, but her thoughts were elsewhere. She remembered every note she had learned on her own, every melody she had memorized by heart, every song that had stayed with her like a secret companion. As her fingers hovered above the keys, a strange feeling settled over her, a mix of calmness and anticipation. She didn't feel pressure. She felt a quiet confidence that came from knowing herself, from knowing the music she had practiced in empty rooms where no one could watch. She pressed the first key, and the sound surprised everyone. It was rich, clear, and precise. The note filled the room in a way that was impossible to ignore. Even the teachers leaned forward slightly, their expressions shifting from casual expectation to curiosity. The second note followed, and then the third, each one flowing naturally into the next. She wasn't rushing. She wasn't trying to show off. She simply let the music come through her fingers, letting it tell the story she had kept hidden for so long. The room seemed to hold its breath. Some students stared, mouths slightly open, realizing that what they had assumed about her might have been completely wrong. She continued, her hands moving with a quiet elegance, her fingers striking the keys with precision and emotion. The piece she had chosen was simple on paper, but in her hands, it became alive. Every note carried meaning, every pause spoke volumes, and every chord resonated in a way that demanded attention. Teachers exchanged glances, some trying to hide their astonishment. They had expected a hesitant student, perhaps someone who would fumble or play awkwardly. Instead, they were witnessing something entirely unexpected. A connection with music so deep it seemed almost instinctive. Her classmates whispered among themselves. Some were shocked, others inspired. She didn't notice them. She didn't even notice the curious eyes of the teachers. She was fully immersed, feeling each note in her chest, letting the melody rise and fall naturally. She had never played for attention, never for approval. Music was her world, and in that moment, she owned it completely. By the time she finished, there was a silence so complete that it seemed to stretch forever. Her first simple notes had already changed everyone's perception. The teachers, who had tested her on purpose, were now reevaluating their assumptions. They had thought they were prepared to judge her skill, but what they had seen was far beyond what they had expected. She closed her eyes briefly, not out of shyness, but in quiet reflection of the journey that had brought her to this moment. For her, this was not about proving anything to anyone. It was about the joy of music, the connection between mind, body, and sound. She had hidden her talent for years, not out of fear, but out of respect for the sacredness of her own practice. And now, without trying, she had revealed it. A small glimpse of the prodigy that had quietly lived among ordinary students all along. As she stepped away from the piano, the room seemed to buzz with a new energy. The teachers, once certain of their judgment, were now silent, contemplating the skill they had just witnessed. Some students approached her hesitantly, their expressions a mix of awe and curiosity. She smiled softly, not proud, not boastful, but content in the knowledge that her music had spoken louder than any words ever could. From that day on, she was no longer just another student. She had shown, even in the smallest way, that hidden talents could emerge at any moment, and that the quietest voices sometimes held the loudest truths. The first note she had played was just the beginning, a simple spark that revealed the depth of a hidden piano prodigy waiting to shine. The next morning, the school felt different. Even the air seemed to hum with quiet curiosity. Word had traveled fast. Her first note from yesterday had left a mark. Students whispered as they passed by. Teachers exchanged glances with a new level of respect, and even the janitor paused, humming the tune he had overheard. No one could quite explain why, but everyone felt the subtle shift. A girl who had always been quiet, who had never sought attention, had suddenly become impossible to ignore. She entered the school as usual, carrying her small notebook, her fingers brushing lightly over its worn cover. It was a comforting routine. Nothing had changed in her world, even if it seemed everything had changed in theirs. Her classmates avoided meeting her gaze at first, unsure of how to approach her. Some wanted to congratulate her, some wanted to question her, and others just stared, fascinated by the quiet power she had displayed without a word. She moved through the hallways without hurry, greeting a few familiar faces with a soft nod. Nothing seemed different to her. She had always loved music, and nothing else had ever mattered as much. In the music room, the teachers were already waiting. They had planned the morning's lessons carefully, but there was an undercurrent of tension now that had not been there before. They spoke in hushed tones, unsure how to handle the girl they had once tested lightly. Their plan to see how she would do had backfired in a way they could never have imagined. The evaluation day had given them an unexpected revelation, and now they faced a new challenge. What to do with someone who was clearly far ahead of her peers. She entered the classroom, carrying her calm confidence like a shield. She didn't look around. She didn't seek validation. Her focus was always on the music. She took her usual seat at the piano, her fingers resting gently on the keys, as if greeting an old friend. Her eyes scanned the notes she had written in her notebook, although she knew most of them by heart. She could hear the melody in her mind before she even played a single note. One teacher approached cautiously. "Would you like to play something for the class today?" he asked, his voice low, careful not to disturb the fragile calm she seemed to carry. She nodded slightly, and without hesitation, she began. The music flowed as if it had been waiting for the room all along. Each note was deliberate, each chord full of expression. Even the students who had whispered about her before now fell silent, listening as if their lives depended on it. It wasn't just her technical skill that amazed them. It was the way she played with emotion. Every note told a story, every pause held meaning, and every rhythm seemed to carry a piece of her own heart. Some of her classmates felt a shiver run down their spines as they listened. They had heard talented students before, But there was something different here. This wasn't about showing off or competing, it was about connection, about the way music could speak when words failed. As she continued, the room seemed to fade away. The whispering, the shifting, the small movements of doubt. All of it disappeared. She was completely absorbed in the music, and for a moment, it felt as if time itself had paused to listen. The teachers, usually composed and confident, were now leaning slightly forward, their expressions a mixture of awe and disbelief. They had been confident in their assessments, certain they knew the capabilities of every student, but here was a reminder that talent could be hidden in the most unexpected places. A few students began to take notes quietly, not of the music itself, but of how she played. They observed the way her fingers curved naturally, how her posture allowed for ease of movement, and how she seemed to anticipate every note before it arrived. It was as if the piano and she were one entity, communicating in a language that only they understood. No one dared interrupt, no one dared distract, because it felt almost sacred. When she finally paused, there was a soft exhale that seemed to sweep across the room. The silence was filled with understanding, a recognition that something extraordinary had just taken place. One teacher cleared his throat, still struggling to find words. We need to discuss your progress," he said carefully, trying to sound neutral, though the awe in his voice was unmistakable. She simply smiled gently, not proud or boastful, just quietly confident in her abilities. The rest of the morning was a mixture of observation and planning. Teachers debated quietly about how best to support her. Some suggested private lessons with advanced instructors, while others worried that she might be frustrated if she remained in regular classes. Meanwhile, students found themselves stealing glances, curious about how she could play with such depth and yet remain so humble. There was a sense of mystery around her, a quiet brilliance that drew people in without any effort on her part. By lunchtime, the story of her performance had spread beyond the music room. Students who had not been present came to hear the tale, eager to witness the girl who could play with both skill and heart. She moved through the cafeteria with quiet grace, ignoring the whispers and glances. She ate her lunch slowly, enjoying the small normality of the moment, while others around her discussed possibilities, competitions, and future performances. She didn't care about accolades or recognition. Her love for music was enough. Later in the day, the teachers invited her for a private discussion. They wanted to understand her better, to see where her abilities could take her. She listened patiently as they spoke, asking questions here and there, always polite, always calm. They were impressed not only by her talent but by her composure. Many students her age might have been overwhelmed or nervous, but she approached each conversation with clarity and focus. She had always understood that music was not about proving oneself to others. It was about expression and understanding. That afternoon, as she practiced alone in an empty room, she allowed herself a small smile. She had always known she loved music, but yesterday and today had shown her something more. People had noticed her talent, yes, but she had also discovered that her music could touch others in ways she hadn't fully realized. Each note she played seemed to hold a promise, that this was just the beginning, that there were endless melodies waiting to be discovered, and that she could explore them at her own pace, in her own way. The teachers, meanwhile, were left to reconsider their approach. They had always measured students by their visibility, their confidence, their eagerness to perform, but here was a reminder that true talent often hides behind quiet humility. It was a lesson in patience and observation, in listening beyond the obvious, and in recognizing that some of the brightest stars shine in silence before anyone notices them. As the day ended, she walked out of the school with her usual calm demeanor. Students stared, teachers whispered, but she paid them little mind. She carried her notebook, her fingers brushing its cover, as if feeling for the notes that lived inside. Her world was the same as it had always been, yet subtly changed. She had revealed a piece of herself, not for fame, not for applause, but simply because the music within her demanded it. And in doing so, she had begun a journey that would quietly reshape the way everyone around her thought about talent, dedication, and the power of a single well-played note. By the time she reached home, the evening sun cast long shadows across the streets, painting everything in a soft glow. She sat at her small piano at home, fingers poised, and allowed herself to explore melodies she had not dared to play in school. The room was quiet, filled only with the gentle sound of her music. It was a world where she was free, where no one could judge or interrupt, and where the magic of her talent could grow in peace. That night, as she closed her eyes before sleeping, she felt a sense of quiet satisfaction. The world outside had seen a glimpse of her gift, but she knew that true mastery was not about recognition. It was about understanding herself, listening deeply, and allowing the music to guide her. And in that moment, she felt ready for whatever came next, confident that her journey had only just begun, and that each note she played would continue to reveal the hidden prodigy she had always known herself to be. The next day, the school felt even more alive than usual. Everyone seemed to be talking about the girl who had surprised them all with her piano skills. Her first note had left a mark that could not be erased. The corridors were filled with whispers and curious glances, some full of admiration, others tinged with disbelief. Students who had barely noticed her before now watched her walk through the hallways, unsure of what to say or how to act. They had seen something extraordinary, something that changed the way they thought about her completely. She moved as she always did, quietly and calmly, her eyes focused ahead, not on the stares or whispers. She carried her notebook as she walked, flipping through it occasionally, but mostly lost in her own thoughts. Music had always been her world, and the reactions of others, though interesting, mattered very little to her. She knew what she could do, and she trusted the time she had spent alone with the piano, practicing in silence, perfecting every note, every chord, every pause. In the music room, the teachers had decided to change their approach. Yesterday's test had revealed far more than they expected. They had anticipated a shy, inexperienced performance, perhaps a student who would struggle with basic notes. What they had seen instead was something rare, a deep understanding of music, paired with a natural talent that could not be taught. Now, they wanted to see more to understand how far her abilities reached. When she entered the classroom that morning, she noticed the teachers waiting for her. Their expressions were cautious but respectful, a sharp contrast to the subtle skepticism they had displayed before. One of them stepped forward and said softly, "We would like you to try something more challenging today, something we think might be just right for you." She nodded slightly, a small smile forming on her lips. She understood that this was an opportunity, but she also knew it was not a test she needed to pass for anyone but herself. As she sat down at the piano, she placed her fingers gently on the keys. She had prepared for moments like this without even realizing it. Every hour spent alone, every quiet practice session, every note memorized, all of it had led to this. She began with a piece that was slightly more complicated than what the teachers had requested. The first note resonated through the room, clear and confident. It was not loud or showy, but it carried a presence that drew everyone's attention immediately. The room fell silent. Students who had been chatting just moments before stopped mid-sentence. The teachers leaned in, their expressions a mixture of fascination and disbelief. Her hands moved with ease, each key pressed with precision, each chord perfectly timed. There was no hesitation, no faltering. She played not to impress, not to compete, but because the music demanded it. And in that moment, she and the piano were inseparable, two parts of the same expression. As she continued, the complexity of the piece began to reveal itself. She navigated difficult passages effortlessly, her fingers dancing across the keys with grace and control. It was not just her technical skill that captivated the audience. It was the emotion she poured into every note. The music told a story, one of patience, dedication, and an unspoken depth that few had ever witnessed. Some students whispered to each other, trying to name what it was they were feeling, but no words seemed adequate. The teachers exchanged glances, realizing that they had underestimated her completely. They had intended to challenge her, to see if she could handle something slightly beyond her level. Instead, they were witnessing something extraordinary, a glimpse of a talent that could surpass even their highest expectations. One teacher quietly muttered to another, "We may have stumbled upon something truly rare here, Her classmates were equally affected. Some were inspired, thinking about their own music and the effort they had put in, while others felt a twinge of envy, unable to understand how someone so quiet and unassuming could be so gifted. But no one dared interrupt. The performance demanded respect, and everyone in the room understood that. Even the students who had once whispered and laughed now listened intently, captivated by the music flowing from her hands. As the piece reached its most complex section, she did something unexpected. She added a small variation, a personal touch that made the music uniquely hers. It was subtle, almost imperceptible at first, but as the notes continued, it became clear that she was not just playing what was written on the page. She was interpreting, creating, and expressing herself in a way that few students her age could manage. The teachers watched, fascinated, realizing that they were seeing not just a student who could play, but a musician who understood the language of the piano on a profound level. By the time she finished, the room was silent, but the air was thick with emotion. Her performance had touched something in everyone present. The teachers took a moment before speaking, as if trying to find words worthy of the music they had just heard. One of them finally said, "That was remarkable, truly remarkable." The other nodded, adding, "We had no idea you could play like this. Your talent goes far beyond what we imagined." She smiled softly, not proud, not boastful, simply content. For her, the joy of music was always about expression, not recognition. But even so, it was nice to see that her efforts had been noticed, that the countless hours she had spent practicing alone had not gone to waste. The performance was not just a demonstration of skill. It was a sharing of something personal, something deep, and it had been received with the respect and attention it deserved. After class, students approached her cautiously. Some asked questions about her practice, others wanted to hear more pieces, and a few admitted that they had never realized how talented she was. She listened politely, answering with a quiet confidence that only added to the impression of her natural poise. She did not boast, did not brag, and did not seek to dominate conversations. Her presence alone was enough to command attention. The teachers, meanwhile, began planning a more structured path for her development. They discussed private lessons with advanced instructors, opportunities for competitions, and the possibility of performing for larger audiences. They wanted to nurture her talent, but they also wanted to ensure that she remained grounded, that her love for music did not become overshadowed by pressure or expectation. Throughout the day, she continued to practice in quiet moments, exploring melodies she had never played aloud before. Her fingers moved instinctively, guided by the years of private study and her own deep understanding of the piano. Each note was deliberate, each chord a reflection of her personality and her journey with music. She did not seek approval, but she found satisfaction in the way her music resonated with the world around her. As evening approached, the school began to empty, but she remained in the music room, lost in her melodies. The piano had become an extension of herself, a place where she could explore, experiment, and express freely. She played for the joy of it, letting the notes carry her imagination to places she had only dreamed of before. In those moments, nothing else existed. The world outside the room, the whispers of classmates, and even the plans of her teachers faded away, leaving only her and the music. That night, as she returned home, she felt a quiet sense of anticipation. The events of the day had shown her that others could see a part of her talent, but she also understood that the journey was far from over. There were more pieces to master, more techniques to explore, and more ways to let her music speak. She sat at her own piano at home, practicing for hours, letting her fingers trace melodies that had been in her heart for a long time. Each note was a reminder of her love for music, of the quiet determination that had brought her this far, and of the path that lay ahead. By the time she finally stopped, the room was filled with the soft echoes of her practice. She leaned back in her chair, feeling a deep sense of fulfillment. Her talent had been revealed, but it was not the recognition that mattered most. It was the knowledge that her music could touch others, that her dedication and love for the piano had not gone unnoticed, and that she had the strength and patience to continue growing in ways no one could predict. As she closed her eyes before sleeping, she allowed herself a moment to reflect on the day. The teacher's surprise, the students' awe, and the whispers in the hallways were all signs of change. But the true significance lay in her own understanding of her abilities. She had proven to herself that she could face challenges, navigate complexity, and express herself fully. And she knew that each note she played in the future would carry with it the lessons of this day. The confidence to trust herself, the courage to reveal her gift, and the quiet joy of doing what she loved most. The next morning, the school would awaken to whispers again, to curiosity and admiration. But she would remain the same calm, focused student she had always been. She understood that recognition was temporary, but mastery and dedication were lasting. And as she prepared to enter the music room once more, she carried with her the quiet knowledge that her journey with the piano had only just begun, and that every note she played could open new doors, touch new hearts, and reveal more of the hidden prodigy within her. The next day arrived with the quiet tension of expectation. The hallways were abuzz with whispers, curious glances, and cautious excitement. Students had been talking about her non-stop since yesterday. Even those who had never been interested in music seemed eager to see what she could do next. Teachers prepared themselves, unsure of what to expect but certain that this girl, who had always seemed so ordinary, could no longer be treated like any other student. She entered the classroom calmly, as if nothing had changed. To her, the music room was always the same. A place where she could breathe, a place where she could lose herself in melodies. She carried her notebook but didn't flip through it right away. Her mind was already filled with the song she wanted to play, a piece she had practiced countless times in solitude. She had never played it for anyone before, and today she would. The teachers watched silently. One of them approached and suggested a more challenging piece, one that few students at her level could manage easily. "This is for you," he said softly. "Take your time and play it as you feel it." She nodded, understanding the gravity of the moment but not intimidated by it. She had always treated music as something personal, something that could express the parts of her mind and heart that words could not. She sat at the piano, placing her fingers lightly on the keys. The first note rang out, delicate yet commanding. It filled the room in a way that demanded attention. Students who had been chattering moments before froze mid-sentence, their eyes wide with anticipation. The teachers leaned forward, almost instinctively, as if drawn to every sound. There was no hesitation, no self-consciousness. She simply let the music flow, and it did naturally, beautifully, as if the piano had been waiting for her touch all along. As the piece progressed, it became clear that this was more than just technical skill. Each note carried emotion. Each chord spoke of understanding beyond the written page. She navigated the complex sections effortlessly, her hands moving with a fluidity that made every phrase seem inevitable. There was no struggle, no awkward pauses, only a seamless connection between mind, body, and music. Students stared, captivated. Some whispered in awe, others simply held their breath. It wasn't just the speed or accuracy that impressed them. It was the way she interpreted the music. She shaped each melody, softened or emphasized notes with subtlety, and let the rhythm breathe naturally. Teachers exchanged glances, amazed at how someone so young could demonstrate such maturity in performance. One teacher whispered, almost to himself, "I've never seen anything like this before. She understands music in a way most adults never will." Her classmates were equally affected. Some felt inspired, imagining what they could achieve if they practiced with the same dedication. Others felt a twinge of envy, unable to reconcile her quiet demeanor with the brilliance they were witnessing. But no one could deny it. She was extraordinary. Even students who had doubted her before now watched with genuine curiosity, waiting for each note to arrive. The room seemed to vibrate with the energy of her performance, as though the piano itself were alive and responding to her touch. Halfway through the piece, she introduced a subtle improvisation, a small change in rhythm and tone that reflected her own style. It was not in the original sheet music, yet it fit perfectly, enhancing the emotion of the music without breaking its flow. The teacher's eyes widened slightly. They had expected a skilled performance, yes, but this creative intuition was something beyond training. It was pure artistry. Students leaned closer, captivated by the unexpected beauty of what they were hearing. By now, whispers had ceased entirely. The room was silent except for the music. It was as if time itself had slowed to listen. Every note seemed to hang in the air. Every pause resonated with meaning. Even those who had come skeptical were now caught in the spell of her talent. They watched, mesmerized, as she guided the music through crescendos and delicate passages, each movement intentional, each sound perfect in its place. The teachers tried to remain composed, but their admiration was clear. They had tested her on purpose, expecting to challenge her, to see how she would manage a slightly difficult piece. Instead, they were witnessing a student who played with the confidence and sensitivity of someone far beyond her years. One teacher murmured, "She doesn't just play the piano, she tells a story through it." Her classmates, meanwhile, began to notice small details. The way her hands curved naturally, the gentle rise and fall of her shoulders with each phrase, the way she seemed to anticipate every note before it arrived. It was mesmerizing. Some students quietly took notes, not on the music itself, but on her technique, her presence, and the quiet strength she exuded. Others simply watched, unable to articulate their amazement, feeling the emotional power of her music without needing words. As the piece approached its conclusion, she played with even more confidence. The final chords resonated through the room, leaving a lingering sense of awe. It was not loud or dramatic, but it carried weight, the kind that makes people pause and reflect. The teachers exhaled slowly, trying to regain composure. Students exchanged stunned looks, realizing that they had just witnessed something rare, something unforgettable. When she finally lifted her hands from the keys, the silence was profound. No one spoke at first. It was as if everyone needed a moment to process what they had just experienced. Then, slowly, whispers began to emerge, full of admiration, surprise, and curiosity. Teachers exchanged glances, now fully aware that she could not be measured by the usual standards. She had proven herself not only as a technically skilled pianist but as a true musician, someone who could express feeling and meaning through every note. She smiled softly, a quiet, humble smile. She did not seek applause or recognition. Her music was for herself as much as for anyone else. But she could feel the shift in the room, the change in perception, and the newfound respect in the eyes around her. For her, this was not about proving herself. It was about the joy of music, the connection it created, and the satisfaction of sharing her inner world without words. After class, several students approached cautiously, some asking about her practice routine, others simply wanting to hear more. She answered with patience and kindness, never dismissive, never boastful. She shared what she could without revealing everything. Her practice methods, the hours spent alone, the joy she found in exploring music. Some students listened in awe, others inspired, and a few silently resolved to work harder themselves. The teachers, meanwhile, began planning next steps. They discussed advanced lessons, performance opportunities, and competitions that could help her grow further. They wanted to ensure she had the support and guidance necessary to reach her full potential. But they also understood the importance of allowing her the freedom to develop naturally, without pressure, without expectation. Her talent was rare, yes, but so was her humility and love for music, and that needed to be preserved. That evening, she returned home, carrying with her the quiet satisfaction of the day's accomplishments. She sat at her own piano, letting her fingers explore freely. The melodies she played were not for anyone else, they were for her. They reflected her emotions, her thoughts, and her unique understanding of music. She experimented with new rhythms, improvised new phrases, and allowed herself to get lost in the sound. The room was filled with her music, echoing softly off the walls, a private celebration of her talent. As she finished, she sat back and reflected. The day had been extraordinary, but it was also a reminder of the journey ahead. There were more pieces to master, more techniques to explore, and more ways to express herself through music. Recognition was gratifying, yes, But her true satisfaction came from the knowledge that she could challenge herself, grow, and continue to create something beautiful. That night, as she lay in bed, her mind replayed the day's performance. The teacher's reactions, the whispers in the hallways, and the quiet admiration of her classmates all mingled in her thoughts. But more than anything, she focused on the music itself, the way it had flowed through her fingers, the joy it had brought, and the promise it held for the future. She knew that this was only the beginning of a much larger journey, one where every note, every practice session, and every performance would shape her into the musician she was destined to become. By the next morning, the school would once again be filled with whispers, glances, and curiosity. Students would be eager to see what she could do next, and teachers would continue to guide her carefully, balancing challenge with support. But she herself would remain unchanged in her quiet determination and love for music. She understood that the journey of a true musician was not measured by recognition or applause, but by dedication, growth, and the courage to express oneself fully. And with each note she played, she was taking another step along that path, revealing more of the hidden prodigy that had always existed within her. The following week brought with it a sense of quiet excitement at the school. Everyone had heard about the girl who had surprised them all with her piano skills. Her first performances had left students and teachers alike amazed, and now there was a feeling of anticipation in the air. People wondered what she might do next, but she moved through the hallways as always, calm, focused, and seemingly untouched by the attention around her. She entered the music room one morning carrying her small notebook. The notebook had become a familiar companion over the years, filled with pieces she had practiced in solitude, ideas for compositions, and notes about her own progress. She never shared it with anyone, but now it seemed almost like a bridge between her private world and the quiet admiration of those around her. She set it down beside the piano and took a moment to stretch her fingers, letting the tension of the day dissolve before she began. The teachers were already there, waiting for her. They had been discussing what would be the next appropriate challenge for her. She had proven her skill beyond what they could have imagined, and now they wanted to guide her growth in a meaningful way. One teacher approached her carefully, speaking softly so as not to interrupt the calm she seemed to carry. "Would you like to try something more complex today?" he asked. She simply nodded, a small smile on her lips, and took her seat at the piano. Her fingers hovered over the keys for a moment, not out of hesitation, but as if greeting an old friend. The first note she played filled the room with a richness that was almost tangible. Students paused in the doorway to watch, and teachers leaned slightly forward, caught in the magic of the sound. It was not just the clarity of the note, or the precision of her technique, but the way the music seemed to carry emotion in every vibration. It was as if she were speaking directly to everyone present, without words, through the language of the piano. As she continued, the complexity of the piece became more apparent. She moved through difficult passages with ease, her fingers dancing across the keys as if they had a mind of their own. The music flowed naturally, rising and falling, softening and strengthening at just the right moments. The teachers exchanged glances, quietly amazed. They had tested her on purpose before, expecting a simple performance, but now they realized that her talent was far beyond what they had imagined. Her classmates watched in silence, captivated by the beauty of her playing. Some felt inspired, imagining what it would be like to play with that level of skill and emotion. Others felt a quiet envy, unable to understand how someone who had always been so reserved could possess such extraordinary ability. Yet even those feelings did not break the spell. Every note she played seemed to hold everyone's attention, and the room became a place where ordinary worries and distractions simply faded away. Halfway through the piece, she added a subtle variation, a small improvisation that reflected her own style. It was delicate and almost imperceptible at first, but as the melody continued, it became clear that she was not just following the sheet music. She was creating, shaping, and expressing something uniquely hers. The teacher's eyes widened slightly. They had expected technical skill, but this creative intuition was beyond what they had anticipated. Her classmates leaned in closer, fascinated by the unexpected beauty unfolding before them. As the performance continued, the emotions in the music became even more pronounced. She played with passion and sensitivity, bringing each phrase to life. Some students felt a shiver run down their spines as they listened. Others felt a quiet inspiration, thinking about what they could achieve if they worked with the same dedication. The teachers, too, were caught up in the moment, unable to hide their admiration. They realized that this was not just a student who could play well. This was someone who truly understood music, who could make it speak in ways most adults never could. By the time she reached the final section of the piece, her performance had reached a level of intensity that left everyone in the room completely absorbed. The final chords resonated, lingering in the air like a soft echo of something unforgettable. For a moment there was silence. No one spoke. No one moved. It was as if the music had created a bubble around the room, holding everyone in its gentle power. Then, slowly the silence broke. The teachers, usually composed and reserved, looked at each other in amazement. One whispered, "I don't think we've ever heard anything like that from a student her age." Another added, "She doesn't just play the piano. She tells a story with it." The classmates, too, began to speak, though their voices were filled with wonder. Some asked questions about her practice routine. Others complimented her skill and expressed admiration. Even those who had doubted her before now looked at her with respect. She smiled quietly, not proud or boastful, but content. She did not need applause or recognition. Her joy came from the music itself, from the way it allowed her to express herself fully. But she also felt a quiet satisfaction knowing that others had been touched by her playing. For the first time, she could see how her private dedication and passion could resonate beyond the walls of her practice room. After class, the teachers gathered quietly to discuss next steps. They wanted to ensure that she would have opportunities to grow, to challenge herself, and to perform in settings that would help her talent flourish. They considered advanced lessons, competitions, and even public performances, but they were careful not to overwhelm her. They had seen that her love for music was pure, and they did not want to risk turning that passion into pressure. Her classmates, meanwhile, continued to talk among themselves. Some were inspired to practice more, others were curious about the way she approached music. A few even approached her after school, asking if she could teach them some techniques or share tips about her practice. She agreed politely, offering advice in her calm and gentle way. Her demeanor was always the same, humble, patient, and focused. She did not let attention change who she was. That evening, she returned home and sat at her piano once more. The house was quiet, the world outside muted by the evening's calm. She began to play freely, exploring melodies that she had not yet shared with anyone. Her fingers moved with confidence, each note carrying emotion, intention, and thought. The music filled the room, echoing softly against the walls. She played not for anyone else, but for herself, finding joy in the freedom to experiment, to express, and to create. As she played, she reflected on the past few days. The reactions of her teachers and classmates had been surprising, even a little overwhelming at times. But more than anything, she realized how much her own dedication had paid off. Hours spent practicing in silence, years of listening, learning, and refining her skill. All of it had led to this moment. And now she could see the beginning of a path that would take her far beyond what she had ever imagined. By the time she stopped, the evening had grown late, and the room was filled with the soft echoes of her music. She leaned back in her chair, feeling a deep sense of fulfillment. She had shared a part of herself with the world, and it had been received with attention, respect, and admiration. But more importantly, she had learned something about herself. That her talent was not just a skill to show others, but a gift to nurture, explore, and let grow. That night, as she prepared for sleep, she thought about what lay ahead. There would be more pieces to master, more techniques to learn, and more opportunities to perform. She understood that recognition could be fleeting, but the dedication to her craft, the love for music, and the joy of creating were lasting. Each day would bring new challenges, but also new chances to grow, to explore, and to reveal more of the hidden prodigy within her. The next morning, she returned to school with the same calm confidence. Students whispered as she walked by, teachers watched with careful attention, and the music room awaited her presence. She knew that each note she played, each performance, and each moment of practice would take her closer to the musician she was meant to become. And with that quiet determination, she was ready to face the next steps of her journey, sharing her music and her gift with the world, one note at a time. The next day arrived with the quiet hum of anticipation. Everyone at school had heard about the girl who had captured attention with her piano. Her performances had become something of a legend in the hallways. Even students who had no interest in music were curious to see her play again. Teachers had begun to talk in hushed tones about her future, about the rare talent she carried, and how it could be nurtured. The excitement was palpable, but she moved through it all with her usual calm. She did not notice the whispers, nor did she seek them. For her, the piano was always the center, the rest of the world secondary. That morning, she entered the music room carrying her notebook. She placed it carefully on the side, and sat at the piano with the quiet confidence of someone who had spent years alone with her music. She closed her eyes briefly, letting herself breathe, and then touched the keys. The first note resonated through the room, clear and rich, instantly drawing attention. The students who were already present stopped their chatter, and even those entering paused, sensing the power in the sound. Teachers leaned forward, their expressions a mix of curiosity and awe. She began her piece, her fingers moving gracefully across the keys. Each note carried intention, each chord a story. The complexity of the music increased, yet she played it as though it were effortless. It was not just technical skill that fascinated the listeners, but the emotion in every phrase. Her playing seemed alive, breathing through the room, reaching out to everyone present. Students stared, some mouths slightly open, unable to hide their amazement. Teachers watched silently, trying to absorb the magnitude of what they were witnessing. As she played, the room felt like it had transformed. The normal noises of the school, the shifting of chairs, the occasional cough, all faded away. There was only her music and the way it moved through the space. Some students felt chills run down their spines, caught up in the intensity and beauty of the performance. Others felt inspired, imagining themselves at the piano, hoping one day to reach even a fraction of her skill. Teachers whispered quietly among themselves, realizing that this was not just talent. It was something rare, something that could change lives if guided properly. Halfway through the piece, she added subtle flourishes that were not in the original composition. It was a delicate touch, almost invisible to anyone who wasn't listening carefully, but it made the music hers. She interpreted the piece with precision, but also with freedom, shaping it with her own emotions and thoughts. Her classmates leaned closer, fascinated, realizing that they were watching not just a student playing a piece, but a young musician revealing herself, layer by layer. By now, the room was completely absorbed. No one spoke, no one moved unnecessarily. The silence was filled only by the piano, and it seemed as though time had slowed to listen. Her fingers moved as if guided by instinct, her body swaying slightly with the rhythm. Her eyes focused on the keys, but also lifted briefly to feel the room. There was a quiet power in her presence, a calm confidence that made everyone feel both awe and comfort. She was in her element, and anyone present could sense it. As she approached the final section, the music intensified. The notes rose and fell with emotion, each one building on the last. The teachers could barely hide their amazement, and even the most skeptical students were silent, captivated by the depth of what they were hearing. There was no showmanship, no need to impress. She played for herself, for the music, and yet the entire room was caught in the magic of it. Every note carried meaning, every pause spoke volumes, and every chord lingered like a memory. When she finally finished, the last note hanging in the air, there was a moment of complete silence. No one moved. No one breathed loudly. It was as though the room had been holding its breath, letting the music sink into every corner of the space. Then, slowly, whispers began. filled with awe and admiration. Teachers spoke first, complimenting her skill, her expression, and the emotion she had brought to the piece. Students approached cautiously, some asking questions about her practice, others simply expressing amazement. She responded quietly, politely, and with her usual calm demeanor. She did not boast, did not exaggerate, and did not seek the attention she was receiving. Instead, she shared what she could in her gentle way, explaining how she practiced, how she listened to music, and how she learned to feel it rather than just play it. Her humility only added to the respect and admiration everyone felt. It became clear that her talent was matched by her quiet, grounded personality, making her presence even more remarkable. The teachers, after class, held a private discussion. They talked about the rare nature of her talent and the importance of nurturing it carefully. They considered advanced lessons, performance opportunities, and competitions, but also realized the need to keep her love for music intact. They did not want pressure or expectations to overwhelm her. They wanted to guide her gently, to provide opportunities without turning the joy she found in music into a burden. That evening, she returned home and sat at her piano once more. The room was quiet, with only the soft light of the setting sun illuminating the keys. She began to play freely, exploring melodies she had not yet shared, experimenting with improvisations, and letting her imagination guide her fingers. Each note seemed to carry her thoughts and feelings, expressing what words could not. She played for herself, not for recognition, yet the joy she felt was evident in every movement, every chord, every pause. As she played, she reflected on her journey. The days of being unnoticed, the hours of practice in quiet solitude, and the small, private victories, all of it had brought her here. She realized that the true reward was not the admiration she received from others, but the knowledge that her dedication and love for music could create something meaningful, something that touched people without her even trying. The music was her voice, her expression, her way of connecting with the world. By nightfall, she had finished playing and leaned back, feeling a deep sense of satisfaction. Her talent had been recognized, yes, but she also understood that recognition was temporary. What mattered most was her relationship with music, the joy of creating, the freedom to explore, and the confidence to express herself fully. She knew that her journey was only beginning, and that each day offered new opportunities to grow, learn, and discover more about her own abilities. Over the next weeks, the school slowly adapted to the realization that she was no ordinary student. Teachers carefully arranged lessons and practice sessions to help her develop further, giving her challenges that would push her skills without overwhelming her. Students watched her with curiosity and respect, inspired by her talent and the way she carried herself. Some began to practice harder, motivated by what they had seen. Others quietly wondered about their own potential, realizing that dedication and passion could create extraordinary results. She continued her practice quietly, day by day, letting music guide her. Each note she played was a small step forward. Each piece she mastered a milestone. She experimented with different styles, explored new techniques, and allowed herself the freedom to make mistakes and learn from them. Every performance, every practice session, every quiet moment alone at the piano was a chance to grow. And as she continued, she realized that her journey was about far more than skill alone. It was about self-discovery, expression, and the quiet joy of doing what she loved most. Eventually, her talent began to attract attention beyond the school. Local music teachers and performers heard of her skill and began inviting her to perform, to participate in competitions, and to share her music with wider audiences. But she remained grounded, always returning to the piano in quiet moments, always reminding herself that the music itself was the greatest reward. Her love for the piano, and the joy it brought, remained at the heart of everything she did. By the time the school year progressed, she had transformed from a quiet, unnoticed student into a young musician whose talent inspired everyone around her. Her story became a reminder that true ability is not always visible at first, that it often lies hidden until the right moment reveals it. And most importantly, she showed that dedication, humility, and love for one's craft can create something extraordinary, something that reaches beyond expectations and touches the hearts of those who experience it. As the final day of that school term approached, she played once more in the music room. Her fingers danced across the keys, producing melodies that were both powerful and tender. Students, teachers, and even visiting musicians listened, captivated by the depth of her talent and the emotion she conveyed. When the last note faded, the room was silent for a moment, filled with awe and admiration. Then, softly, applause began, spreading throughout the room. But she simply smiled quietly, satisfied not by the attention, but by the music itself, the expression of her inner self, and the joy that came from sharing it. Her journey was far from over. There would be more challenges, more opportunities, and more pieces to learn and interpret. But she had proven to herself and to the world that talent, when nurtured with patience, love, and dedication, could shine in the most unexpected ways. The hidden prodigy she had always known herself to be was finally seen, not because she had sought it, but because she had stayed true to her passion and allowed her music to speak for itself. And as she left the school that day, carrying her notebook and her quiet confidence, she knew that every note she would play in the future was a chance to grow, to inspire, and to continue revealing the extraordinary gift that had always been inside her.